Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman, Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, May 27th. Time for another show, and it is a Welcome Back Wednesday for Greg Dworkin, who will join us in just a few minutes on the show to round up what he viewed over the weekend. Things, of course, still spinning largely out of control across the country and around the world as we remain mired in a global pandemic, which Donald Trump refuses to lead either the country or the world out of. But he is on top of yelling at Joe Scarborough, which is good news. I just happened to start things up and happen upon that. Donald Trump complaining about who he's now calling Psycho Joe Scarborough, and says he's rattled, and not only by his bad ratings, but blah, 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 blah. And really, who cares about what's rattling the guy? He's a television personality. He does a morning show. Apparently, it's relatively popular. I'm sure it's important to the revenue models of MSNBC, but it's not an important job. Being president of the United States is supposed to be the important job. Should be focused on that, but he never has been. And, of course, 100,000 Americans are dead as a result, and 100,000 more to come is, by all indications. It does look a little bit like things are slowing down out there, but I think what we may find in the end is that all that happened was that the disease, having ravaged New York City and its metropolitan area, has just moved on to less densely populated areas of the country, but more of them. So the slowing in the deaths and in the new cases is simply a matter of the virus having to reach across more space to find more victims, which is something we could prevent it from doing if we stayed home. But, of course, reopening the economy, heading out to NASCAR races, swimming at Lake of the Ozarks, having parties left and right, reopening mega churches, etc., will do the job for it. The virus has no legs, and it doesn't fly, despite the fact that it apparently can stay airborne for the 6 to 13 feet between people, or the feet that are supposed to be between people when they sneeze and cough at one another. But anyway, all right, that's kind of where we stand on the big picture. And we'll bring the details along with that as Greg joins us later on, and we round up the various stories that he's stored away and that I've stored away in the last couple of minutes to 4 days, depending on which one of us you're talking about. The Daily Co's Radio, of course, is live now, and we have our morning tweet. Although I just saw it go by very quickly from Bill in Portland, Maine, but I guess everybody jumping on the bandwagon of yelling at the president for yelling at Joe Scarborough has kind of buried it. There it is. Daily Co's Radio is live now, in case you didn't know what we were doing here. This afternoon, this is true, 2 NASA astronauts blast off for the space station from American soil for the first time since 2011. My wife mentioned this the other day, and it's exciting news. And this morning, Kagro X, me, David Waldman, I'll be teaching you how to say Godspeed with tears in your eyes in over 150 languages. We'll, of course, make use of Google for that. And I'm promising actually a number closer to, 0 additional languages. In English, I can teach you how to say it. We just did it. And we don't have much more to add to that. Let's see. Is this the... I've been looking at the headline of 2 hairstylists expose 140 clients to COVID-19, and it is, though, the same Missouri hairstylists that we've heard about over the past couple of weeks. I don't think we discussed it in depth on the show, and no confirmed cases, I guess, coming out of that. But that was, I think, brought up. I think Greg may have mentioned it as well at the end of last week. These were folks who came to work with symptoms. And, of course, we discussed the fact that, they came to work with symptoms. Not a good idea, of course, but something of a necessity, I suppose, if you have no paid time off and the government has done nothing to relieve you of the burdens of falling ill with this thing. So it's been kind of interesting watching reactions to that. But we've got that. We've got a number of other stories. Greg is already here. I will store away a few more. My money is on Greg bringing them up before I get to them. Let's just get right to the money. Yeah, as a matter of fact, my money is on it. I don't know how I'm going to get that money back, though, even if I win. But it's all virtual. It's Bitcoin. No one understands what it's worth. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good.
For the moment.
That's good news.
We had it was interesting. I had to get my emissions checked on my car.
Oh, your car emissions. Okay, I see.
So ventured out of the house.
Yeah.
And it turned out there was a very efficient way to do it. You stay in your car. You have your little card with the $20 bill attached to it on the front seat. And when you get to the place, when you get to the garage, you call them from your car and say, okay, I'm here, having made an appointment. You get out of the car with your mask and sit on the front porch where there are every 6 feet places to sit while they check your car. Mm-hmm. So you've left the car. You're now sitting a ways away. Then the garage guy comes out in a mask. Everybody's masked. That's really the point of the story.
Good. Well, they're checking emissions.
And so they then get in the car, drive the car into the garage, check the emissions, drive the car out, get out of the car. They take the money. They take the card. Mm-hmm. They leave the temporary you're clear piece of paper. And then you get in the car and drive off. So you haven't really gone anywhere near them. Yeah. They haven't gone anywhere near you. All right. It's a relatively busy garage. I mean, there's probably 30 people there between the workers and the people dropping off their cars to get sick and well again, car doctor. And everybody's wearing masks, obviously, to protect the cars. So of the 30-some-odd people, there wasn't a single one that was not wearing a mask. Connecticut people are being pretty responsible, is what I'm trying to say. And so you can open up slowly, and you can open up in a proper way without being Lake of the Ozarks.
Yeah, I mean, it is doable, and large swaths of the economy can with the time that we bought by closing. Part of that time was for companies to spend thinking, how can we get back open again? Or when the time comes, if we're not essential enough, when we do open, how can we do this safely? A lot of people actually took that time and wrote down some procedures, I guess.
Right. Now, the funniest thing, and they all say, we do CDC guidelines. I've had to have some appliances fixed. Various and sundry things have broken. So we've had people over the house. Yeah. And the repair people all say, we follow CDC guidelines. They first ask you if anybody in the house is sick before they come over. And if the answer is no, they come in a mask and they try to stay away from you and you try to stay away from them. And the funniest part, whether you're talking about, up close and personal encounters like this, or whether you're just watching people as you drive and they're driving in the other direction. And again, I would say while you're in the car, probably 50% of the people that I pass are wearing masks while in the car. I wear my mask. And part of the reason for that is the donning and doffing part.
Yes. All right. I see.
Once you put it on, you really shouldn't touch the mask to take it off. You can't take it off and on and off and on and off and on. That's how you get it on your hands, and that's eventually how you get it into your face. So people put the mask on, and they take it off after they're in a position to wash their hands. And I'm watching people pass, and the funny part is just, you see this out of the corner of your eye as you're driving. People are wearing masks, and then they try to take a sip of coffee and realize you can't.
Yes. Although somebody has invented a mask that says you can.
Yeah, you just put a straw in the middle and, just break the seal and all of that, which doesn't work. So, again, people are being responsible. In Connecticut and New York and New Jersey, cases are dropping, even though they're rising elsewhere. Alabama doesn't seem to be under control right now because of the density. The number of people who are getting sick isn't anywhere near what it was when New York was going out of control. And there's this fascinating piece here in Stat News by Helen Branswell.
Okay.
The great Helen Branswell.
Oh, she's great.
New research rewrites history of when COVID-19 took off in the U.S. and points to missed chances to stop it. And the long and the short is that the virus that started in Washington, WA1 it's called, is seemed to be the same virus everywhere. But actually, it turns out genetic analysis shows that there were different strains, and probably not because one strain mutated and has more transmission than the other. But when you're trying to figure out what happened in the U.S., the fact that there were some early cases, December, January, isn't how it took off.
Oh,
you have to imagine chaos theory and some of these old articles. We showed you various and sundry simulations that you can click on to see how measles spreads.
Oh, yeah, right.
You know, with the little dots bouncing around. And if you run the simulation 10 times, the same number of people don't get sick each time. It's kind of random. That's where the chaos theory comes in. So the whole point of all of this is that you could have had one or two people infected with coronavirus who came to Seattle.
Yes.
And stayed in Seattle. And they infected one or two people, and then it stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And then later,
that can happen, sure.
Somewhere around mid-February, a month later, somebody came in, maybe from Italy or Europe, well after Trump had done the travel ban from China that was ineffective because 100,000 people still came, but then announced that there was going to be even more travel banning, scaring everybody from Europe, Americans in Europe, expats and stuff, to rush home in airports and long lines and expose everybody before the travel ban got, really hammered. Since it was never really fully explained at the time, it was just incompetently rolled out. And the point is that one of those wound up being the chain of transmission virus that happened at a later date. So it could have been the one in Seattle. It just wasn't, because sometimes randomly it just doesn't happen. And it was a later introduction of the virus, probably from Europe and not Asia, or maybe from Asia, but not necessarily China, that wound up, being the giant fuse that lit everything in this country. And there's several points to that. That's one of the reasons why you never say, okay, this is a virus from this particular country, because you really don't know that. But more importantly, if it were mid-February that things really started to get out of control, that means that we had a window where we knew in January something was going on and we didn't act, and therefore it really is Trump's fault.
Oh, well, that gets a lot of resonance with me.
That's different than, we did everything. We found that case contact because we've always told you Seattle Department of Public Health is terrific. And look what they did. They found this case and they did all these strict maneuvers and it spread across the country anyway. Well, no, actually, they probably contained it.
Yeah.
Showing things work when you do it right. And then later on, something else happened with some other person that wasn't contained because people on the East Coast didn't jump and do South by Southwest cancellations of everything. We were still arguing about the St. Patrick's Day parade, if you recall, right until the day before the parade.
Right. I mean, that was actually on for a while.
So we didn't shut down the way we should have. There were people at the time saying, oh, my goodness, if Seattle and South by Southwest are shutting down, we should do that too before there's a problem instead of waiting for a problem. And people like de Blasio said, we don't have to do that.
Right. And when it gets here, it gets here.
When it gets here, it gets here, and then we'll shut down. And then it's too late.
Right. Yeah, well, that was the early.
And everybody was telling him who knew something about this, that's not the right way to do it. Turns out that's not the right way to do it. We did have that opportunity. We blew it. That's why that report is just so important. Yeah,
well, that is pretty interesting and amazing. There's been that's been a growing line of thinking, certainly, that there were different strains of the virus and it had been introduced in different ways. But, yeah, that's the next natural conclusion.
Now, this is a fellow I follow. You've heard of Scott Gottlieb, used to be FDA commissioner, a conservative doc, but a researcher and a pretty honest one as far as that goes. Nice. I followed him way before he was FDA commissioner. And it is frustrating to get all your good data from AEI, but that's where he works and that's where his information comes from. So I follow him. And it's a lot better than a lot of the crap that we're getting out of the CDC in terms of analysis. For example, he'll look at cases without New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, without the tri-state area in the country going up, whereas cases in those areas are going down. And because there's so many cases in that area, it affects the entire U.S. curve. So it's good to look at it that way. So he wrote about this Helen Branswell article, the great Helen Branswell, New analysis says viral introduction associated with first known U.S. COVID outbreak entered the country mid-February, suggesting we still had a window in February to block sustained transmission. And then Trevor Bedford, who's one of the great geneticists who's analyzing this, who first said, no, look, it's the same virus all over the place, re-looked at everything and said, no, I was wrong. I made the claim that the Washington State outbreak descended directly from the January 15th arrival, but that's not really what happened. Common ancestor between January 18th and February 9th are between 3 and 6 weeks before community transmission was detected on February 28th. 3 to 6 weeks. That's why everybody says, oh, we opened up today. Look, 3 days from now we have this thing. You have to wait a month, not just 2 weeks. It isn't just a question of individual transmission. It's a question of whether or not you get a chain started. So it isn't just, okay, well, if they party on Monday, then 2 weeks from Monday we can tell what happened. No, you can tell whether a person got sick 2 weeks from Monday. But then it takes another 2 weeks to spread it to everybody and see what happens.
Yeah. We have the data out of Alabama.
And that goes back to your story about Missouri with the two hairdressers.
Okay. Yeah.
Interestingly, they were wearing masks, and most of the people exposed were wearing masks. So we get to see how well masks work.
Right.
But the point is, at least one of them was symptomatic, so it was stupid to be at work. Yes, I understand frustration, and you have to work. If you don't work, you don't feed your family. But you still can't go to work sick. You can't, because you're going to do something like this. So not only did they go to work and cut everybody's hair, but then they went to the gym and they did a bunch of other stuff. And that's how those exposures happen. And so what's happening here is contact tracing, the exact right thing to do. Right that they all wore masks, right that they were contact tracing individuals so that you can look at the 150 some odd people who were exposed and then isolate the sick and quarantine the well so that you can get it under control. That's exactly what you need with testing and case contact. The trouble is you can't do that 75 different times in the same city with the same people. There aren't enough people to do that. And so you have to stop those things before they happen rather than have 100 events like this and then case contact trace all of them. You just don't have the resources for that.
It brought back to mind, the idea of the hairdressers saying, well, I've got to go to work, but then going off to do all these other things while symptomatic. And I remember thinking back to the story of the Ebola doc who didn't know he had Ebola, but all the places that he went and how they did all the contact tracing and were managed.
Craig Spencer, the guy who took the L train down to Brooklyn and went bowling.
Right. Yeah.
That's when my friend Michael Cohen, the writer, not Michael Cohen, the jail guy, said the L train, like Ebola, is the fifth worst thing that could happen on the L train.
Right. I mean, we really did get lucky.
Years later, and I love that comment still.
But it struck me as I was I said, oh yeah, no, that's right. He did go bowling. And then I remember early on in the let's reopen the economy phase, there was that odd collection of things that people wanted to be able to open. I think bowling alleys was on them. Just once again, proving that we learn nothing from history. I think everybody agreed with the Ebola doc. No, bowling really isn't someplace that you absolutely had to go, even though you didn't know you were symptomatic. But if you do know you have symptoms, if you feel like you have to work, one, you don't and you shouldn't. But two, don't follow it up by saying, and I'll take care of some errands as well.
Craig Spencer, who is that doc, of course, is an ER doc, and has been outspoken on Twitter and a great follow in terms of the coronavirus response from people. So the fact of the matter is that, in his line of work, you get exposed to stuff.
Yeah, he's supposed to.
And by that, I mean he takes the L train.
Yeah, right. And bowls.
He's also in the emergency department in New York City.
Okay. So a lot of those things are likely to carry some risk. But I don't know. I had forgotten about the bowling angle on it. But, we seem to be running into an awful lot of this. Alabama's numbers, as you, they came to mind when you mentioned having to wait 2 weeks. Because they've been open for about 2 weeks. And then there was initially, yesterday, and they've held up, reports of a great surge down there. But this, too, would be people who were actually ill before they reopened. And only now, I guess, between now and 2 weeks from now, will we start to find out who got sick after the reopening, but nonetheless,
right.
they
And
still
they're
have
already
a
out of
huge surge.
ICU beds in Alabama, so it's like a big deal.
Yeah, right. We found out about that from the mayor of Montgomery not long ago. But it struck me. I saw the numbers reported yesterday. I think they were reporting 4,700 new cases in the 2 weeks since they reopened, which again, they would have been sick before the reopening. But even so, that still means compared to what Alabama had, which was about 15,000 cases, 1/3 of their caseload now are people who got sick in the last 2 weeks since they reopened, and we haven't even measured the effect of reopening yet. So they've really shot themselves in the foot. But that is something that they do down there in Alabama.
Well, it happens everywhere. Here's New York. I presume it's New York because this is CNBC. And this is an argument between Andrew Sorkin and Joe Kernan.
Okay.
Kernan is a Squawk Box host. So his Twitter handle is Joe Squawk.
I don't know who's on that show. I only see it on the TV guide.
Well, you might recognize him. He's one of those bombastic, Trump supporters.
Guess so. Oh yeah, all right. I'll take a look.
And I'm sending you if I didn't, I sent you a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm putting it at the bottom where you could see it. It's 30 seconds. I don't know if you have time to play 30 seconds.
Yeah, I do. Well, I have to open it up and get it through. Well, let's see. It's on. You just sent it from Skype. Okay.
Let's see if you can do that. Because basically, to set the scene, Andrew Sorkin has his own market rally show, and Kernan is also a cable host on the same network, but at a later time. So Kernan's a guest on Sorkin's morning show, which happened this morning.
All right, here I got it now.
Play it so people can listen to it.
Sure. All right. Let's see. View original. Fine. Let's do that. Okay.
Do not try this at home. We're professionals.
Yeah. Right. Well, I'm at home, but don't
you're
try
not.
it.
No, you're not.
Oh,
Joe.
see, I am at home. Hold on a second. Oh, he's talking to Joe. Joe may not be at home. All right. Here we go. I think.
I'm sorry? No, you're not. No, you're not, Joe. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead with the news.
You panicked about the market, panicked about COVID, panicked about the ventilators, panicked about the PPE, panicked about ever going out again, panicked that we'd ever get back to normal.
Joseph, you didn't panic about anything.
What good is it? Why
Joseph,
not help people
died.
keep their head? I understand that.
100,000 people died, Joe, and all you did was try to help your friend, the president.
Okay, that's raw. What's going on?
I just thought, you should have an idea of how all of this is playing.
Okay. They're yelling
on Wall Street.
Yeah, all right. Well, they like to yell at each other. I'm glad to see that.
That's why they call it Squawk Box, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that's definitely a strain of thinking.
That the market is amoral.
Okay.
As well as immoral. At best amoral and at worst immoral. But obviously they see people as human. What did they call it?
Oh, yeah, right. Human capital. I don't remember now.
Stock.
Yeah, stock, right. Human capital stock.
Right?
Right.
And so at least
human
they
capital
didn't say,
broth.
and they taste delicious with,
right.
certain
the stock
sauces.
is just stronger than the broth.
But
really
the whole
gives it
idea
flavor.
is, there's a later one that comes right after that, another 30-second thing, where Kernan is trying to defend himself and says, I'm just looking out for the investors.
Of course. Who else would you
that's
look out for?
absolutely correct. That's exactly what he's doing. To hell with the fact that 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 people are dead. I'm looking out for the investors. Where are your priorities?
If there were
Andrew Sorkin?
100,000 investors dead, that would be a problem.
Yes, but since they weren't investors, who
Right.
cares? I mean, it's perfect.
Yeah.
Because it encapsulates the entire discussion here about saving lives versus the economy. Right there in 30 seconds.
That's it. He might as well have said it. This is great news for the economy. It's 100,000 people off the payroll. That's so much more
Right, and we know that the
bonuses
whole problem with people is that they're a drag on the bottom line. You got to pay them benefits and stuff like that. You don't have to pay the benefits anymore. It's great for companies.
Coronavirus is killing them for free. This is terrific. Yeah, well,
you don't even have to hire people to fire them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is just attrition.
Hire these consultants. You don't have to hire George Clooney to fly in and fire all these people.
In fact, I didn't know that. I hired one, and before the bill comes due, I'm going to see if I can kill him with coronavirus, so I don't have to pay him.
But it's a perfect encapsulation of what's going on here.
Fantastic. They're great people.
Yeah, great people. So I'm looking on Twitter to the reaction to this. Well, everybody knows Andrew Sorkin has a liberal bias. Well, you're kind of missing the point of the discussion, aren't you?
I guess so.
Yeah, but did you see his interview with Joe Biden? What? What's that got to do with this?
No, I didn't. And I can't imagine
I didn't,
what
and
it's
in my
doing.
copious free time, maybe I won't. But what's that got to do with what you just saw?
I don't know. That's it is unusual. That seems to be the line from the Trumpers now. You panicked about this. You panicked about that. Well, we did something. The president you're defending.
We didn't do enough, and 100,000 people died, and we had a window in February where we could have done more.
It could have been 15 down to 0.
And no, shutting down China, except not completely, was not the answer, was never the answer, and didn't do anything like what you claimed it did, according to the data.
Yeah, right. Wrong country,
in fact,
wrong
everything
region.
Trump did made it worse.
And not only that, when they finally did get around to the right region, they closed it down wrong.
That's not good for business.
No, as it turns out, it's hurting things. And so President rightly concentrating his fire on another television host.
Joe Scarborough.
That's also super important and doing all the things that are necessary to, monitor the country. I don't know. He's, he lives in fantasy land. That's all I can say.
Yes. Well, after the break, when we come back, we'll talk about how it's playing with the public. That's when we're going to do the politics. Okay. But I just thought all that stuff was kind of interesting as a prelude.
I think so. I'm in agreement, and glad we got a chance finally to get that audio on the air. Took a little bit, but all right. Let's see.
That was pretty remarkable little fight there.
Yeah. You don't get to see, I don't know, maybe that happens more on CNBC and squawk boxes or something, but there are a couple of squawk boxes.
You'd have to watch it regularly to know.
Yeah. I'm not going to go that far, but I'll take your word for it. Yeah, I only see the squawk boxes listed on when I turn on my satellite TV and run through the guide. I see that in wherever CNBC numbers are on DirecTV. Oh, yeah. There's an Asia squawk box. There's a next door neighbor squawk box, whatever. I didn't realize it was an ongoing franchise, but now I know. All right, we'll be back to squawk some more in 2 minutes. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're continuing on with our boxes and squawks and squawk boxing, boxing, squawk birds, whatever. You have an interesting story you just sent me. I don't know if we necessarily need to spend time on it, but this guy certainly did. It's a new one. Where was it? Queensland, Australia? Yes.
Something like that.
Right.
My dad made good use of his time in lockdown and built a huge laughing kookaburra. It's a giant bird being pulled like a float by his pickup.
Oh, it's great.
And this giant wooden bird with a flapping mouth.
Very detailed.
Moving back and forth. And apparently it's got noise with it.
Oh, all right.
So as you drive by, you can hear the thing.
I guess so. I'll play it at random.
Pretty funny responses to it.
While you talk. I think so. Let's see. If I put it in Pocket, that should mean I can open it up on the main computer. My mouse is really
right. So one person tweets over, the therapist, giant laughing kookaburra isn't real. It can't hurt you. And then they show this picture.
Oh my gosh, that's eerie. It's like a horror movie. Wow. Very jungle sounding, or stereotypically jungle sounding, but I don't think it doesn't live in the jungle. And so this guy is now driving it through the neighborhood behind his pickup truck.
Because he's got nothing else to do.
Yeah, I guess. But, I was going to say, well, congratulations to them for having suppressed the virus so successfully there.
So let's talk politics.
This guy had the time to do it. Looks like somebody out of the Rose Bowl parade. It's terrific.
Yeah, exactly. Except
driving on the wrong side of the road, but yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Do you plan to get vaccinated against COVID-19? AP NORC poll this morning. Yes, 49. No, 20. Not sure, 31. I'm not worried about the not sure 31. That'll be yes. So it'll be 80-20. But there's 20% of the population that will just say, no, we're not going to do it. Hopefully that'll be enough to protect people. But
maybe, right? If it's just 20, I think we'll largely be okay. But, all right. Does it make any difference when it's something so brand new and still, currently in circulation?
That's where the
20%
I'm not sure
really hurt us.
Comes in.
Oh, okay.
But we'll see over time.
I got you. All right. We'll see what happens.
This is the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. A presidential smear. Trump imitates the Steele dossier in attacks on Joe Scarborough and concludes, we don't write this with any expectation that Mr. Trump will stop. Perhaps he even thinks this helps him politically, though we can't imagine how. But Mr. Trump is debasing his office and he's hurting the country in doing so. This is the Wall Street Journal editorial board, who I'm sure will in the next week or so endorse him for president. But still, it's always interesting to see that. Just like Chuck Grassley is saying, I don't think that anything Trump has said has justified his firing all of the inspectors general. But what he left out is, but of course, I'll be endorsing him for re-election.
Right. Well, that's
and it won't do anything because, like, sternly worded letters are 2015.
Yeah. Let's see. I don't know if I did. Is it in your roundup, the Wall Street Journal, or?
No, I didn't send it because I figured it was stuck behind the pay line. But it's really short. I mean, it didn't say a whole lot of stuff.
It's interesting that they chose.
But there it is.
The way they put that he's doing a bad thing, just like that bad Steele dossier, which is usually Trump's argument about why Democrats are bad. And so that's interesting that I guess they thought that maybe he would think that was a tip of the hat to him so he wouldn't be angry with them.
So overall politics here.
I don't know. Yeah.
I got two from roll call.
All right.
This one is on the House. Ratings update. Democrats more likely to boost majority than lose it. Battlefield shrinking as some who flipped Trump districts now look safer. Like Laura Underwood.
Abigail Spanberger.
Josh Harder, Katie Porter, Antonio Delgado, Dan Bishop, news. Troy Balderson, Dan Crenshaw, John Carter on the Republican side. They go from likely Republican to solid Republican. But the competitive contexts do not include Katie Porter and Antonio Delgado in New York's 19th district.
All right. I don't recognize Delgado's name, but that's good news. Porter, I'm happy
us
about.
Local New Yorkers do. We know some people who live in that district. You know some people that live in that district. I
probably do. I don't know him, but come on over. We'll get to know
him. Oliver from Daily Kos, for example.
Lives in that district? Okay. So you can tell us about him.
So Republicans' bigger challenge is Trump is underperforming his own results in 2016. So that's Nathan Gonzalez looking at the House. And Stu Rothenberg looking at the presidential race. Memorial Day 2020, presidential race still leans Biden. Despite coronavirus and multiple scandals, essentials of the presidential race are virtually unchanged. The thing I like about Stu Rothenberg is, besides the fact that it's Stu Rothenberg, is that he wrote 2 months ago Biden was leading. And he said nothing has changed since then. In other words, this is the counter to the, Trump was on his way to re-election, but the coronavirus changed everything. Rothenberg's point is that Biden was actually in the lead and the coronavirus changes nothing at the moment. The question's going to be later on, this is me, not Stu, is that it's lean Biden and not likely Biden, he says, because the president's knack for creating chaos and manufacturing issues means the Democrats still have a way to go before they can feel even the least bit comfortable. We'll never feel comfortable, so that's not going to happen. But I still contend, as I have for months, if not years, that people underestimate the intense dislike of Trump and opposition, and that the pandemic may actually make the bottom fall out of the I don't like either one crowd, and the you have to win my vote crowd. Actually, it's your vote or die now, folks.
Yeah,
not win my vote over.
Yeah.
But more importantly, of course, the reason you can't call the race is because it depends upon who shows up, and you don't know that yet. Rachel Bitterkoffer's theory, she's got a op-ed in the New York Times yesterday about picking vice president candidates. But, you know, the point of all of it is that everything that Trump does to tick people off doesn't just motivate his base, it motivates our base. Right. And if you come out and vote, he loses. I mean, that's pretty clear. What we don't know is who's going to show. And that's why him losing ground with seniors is so important, because seniors are reliable voters. They're not more important voters than young people, but they're more reliable voters than young people. They're not more important than black voters or Latino voters, but they're reliable voters in swing states especially, like Florida and Arizona. And so that's why those voters are so important. So this happens with the background, as Francis Wilkinson writes in Bloomberg today. The president is a sick, delusional, incompetent, vicious, authoritarian thug who enjoys the full support of his party.
Is that good? Yeah.
Which I think pretty much summarizes what's going on here. So you can't have the bottom fall out of your numbers unless your own party deserts you. That's what happened with Jimmy Carter and Democrats, and that's why Carter fell into the 30s. That's not going to happen in this particular election, but Trump could still lose bigly and hugely, even if that doesn't happen. And that's one of those situations where having his job approval rate hang at 42, 43 means it doesn't go up, doesn't go down, doesn't go up even when you get the rally round effect, and it doesn't go down. But that doesn't mean that you win with those numbers. In fact, the opposite is true. And so I think that's important to know. For example, Larry Sabato from University of Virginia. We always like to get Virginia stuff in here because we like people from Virginia. Poll, awesome. Donald Trump leads Biden by just 3 points in Utah. And this is not a typo. Sure, it's an outlier. But then again, that Arizona +9 for Biden was an outlier. That Georgia saying it's tied was an outlier. They're all outliers. Well, if they're all outliers, maybe they're not outliers anymore.
Yeah. Is the pandemic an outlier?
It still is.
Yeah. All right. Just wondering. I mean, that's sort of an outlier event, and Trump feels this is very unfair. I see his comment.
Right.
But,
Jonathan Bernstein, political scientist, notes, with presumably the final poll of the day yesterday, Trump's disapproval via 538 ticks up to 53.6, the highest since back in December 2nd. 8 of the 12 previous polling era presidents never reached that level at any point in their first terms. What he's doing is not working. Right. He adds, and I still say, this is all from the Pundit Roundup, and I'll give it to you. I still say we have no idea whether we've seen the full effects of the virus and the economy on Trump's approval. Me? I say we haven't. I think it's going to get worse.
Oh, okay.
Maybe we have. Maybe this is just the beginning. No way of knowing as of now. And that's true. We don't know.
Yeah, we haven't really seen the full shakeout. We've been distracted by the virus. Though the virus has caused this, we really have no clue what the impact of 30 million people suddenly losing their jobs is.
Right, and a lot of them are older people.
Yeah, so they're not coming back. There's no rebound for them.
But when you look at senior votes, that's part of what's going on. We're not just afraid of dying.
And there's some economic anxiety for you. A few 100,000, maybe million people who were hoping for another 5 to 10 years of work to make up for what they lost in Enron or something, or the various collapses, who now find
the guy who runs Enron ought to lead the country, because it's always good when business people lead the country.
Sure. Right. Well, as it happens, he bowed out of the race
look
by
at Joe
dying.
Squawk. We want those guys in charge, right?
I guess so.
New poll. In partnership with Latino Victory, U.S. and Latino Decisions, we found Latino voters in Arizona and Florida overwhelmingly blame Donald Trump for the effects of the coronavirus crisis, and many are looking to Joe Biden as a better leader for our country. See, what you have is this soft stuff about not approving of his coronavirus stuff, and now starting to get 50-50 with Joe Biden on the economy, while Trump's overall approval numbers don't change all that much. They're certainly not going up anymore, and they may be drifting down slightly. What I'm saying is that the soft stuff underneath is going to lead to the I won't vote for him, which is a very different measure than whether or not I approve or disapprove of his job. I feel obligated to tell you liberal pollsters I approve of his job, but, I'm staying home.
I guess so. Yeah, well, that's a legit alternative for Trump supporters to cling to if they have a lick of sense in them. So, well, look, he did a fine job for most of the one term that we gave him, and now we're done.
Yeah. Anyway, speaking of a lick of sense, don't lick people during coronavirus. Okay, don't cough on them, don't sneeze on them, and absolutely don't lick them. This is from First Read, NBC News. The 2020 election could hinge on these current fights over ballot access. Remember, Trump is trying to legitimize the election and trying to that's what led to Francis Wilkinson's points there. He's trying to legitimize the election, and mail-in voting ballots are being challenged in California and other places. I guess Michigan was the one that he pulled out and said they're sending them out, even though Secretary of States and Republican states are doing the same thing.
Right. And they're not sending ballots, they're sending applications, right?
So he doesn't want Americans to be able to vote by mail during this pandemic, and I'll show you why. Tom Bonnier, pollster, Democratic co-founder of Target Smart, says this is remarkable. Democrats are outnumbering GOP by better than 2-to-1 margin among mail ballots cast thus far in the June 2nd PA primary, Pennsylvania primary.
Okay.
Okay, now there are statewide races,
Sure.
but more on the Democratic side than the Republican side.
All right.
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
So the Democratic primary isn't driving a lot of turnout at this point. It's just that they're practicing their voting by mail, and that's pretty cool.
Oh, that is a great thing. Yeah, I mean, if there's just not that much going on that would otherwise explain their motivation, I just want to see if this thing works.
Right. Here's a very, very simple cartoon before we get to Nick Orovich's Wednesday Navigator summary, because now he posts every Wednesday.
All right.
But this was by Catalino. I think I sent you the picture, but I'll just send it again so it's easy for you to find. It's just a very simple cartoon, easy to describe, that kind of fits the mood. And it's simply the number 100,000, large numbers, and a smallish Donald Trump is standing on one of the zeros.
Oh, yes.
With his driver in his hand.
Yeah.
So all it is Trump golfing on top of the number 100,000. And that pretty much says where the country's at right now. And people need milestones to put these numbers into perspective.
Yeah.
But interestingly, some of the better models are now saying by the time September rolls around, there'll be another 100,000 the way we're going.
I think so.
So the way that you look at this, you guys were all panicking. Well, if you didn't panic at 100,000, that's how you get to 200,000. Joe Squawk.
Yeah, that's true. And I did see somebody tweeting about that yesterday that struck me. I don't think I'll put it aside, but somebody saying, good comment, I thought. If you had told me on January 1st, Happy New Year, here's the prediction, by May, 100,000 Americans will die in a pandemic. He was saying, I don't know how I pictured American society reacting and adjusting to that news, but I'm pretty sure I would have guessed we would be a lot more angry about this.
Right.
Than we are.
Did you see the Lincoln Project's latest ad on that?
Yes, the body bags.
Yeah, quite good.
I did.
Red, white, and blue body bags, and as you pull back, it forms the American flag. 100,000 dead Americans, one wrong president. There's just no way he's going to be able to run from this.
Good. He's got alternative plans to distract you. Do you know he's thinking of another tank parade for July 4th, which is exactly what D.C. needs.
As Rick Wilson noted, you can try to do that and make Joe Biden into Mike Dukakis, but it only works when you have a president who's joined the Army in 19 and jumped out of planes and has incredible national security credentials and so on and so forth. He's talking about HW and saying, you can't work with this orange pant loaf.
Wow. Ugh. That's a new one on me. I don't think I've heard that one.
Well, that's what Rick Wilson's good for. Wow, so I go back to this December 2019 op-ed in the New York Times by George T. Conway III, Steve Schmidt, John Weaver, and Rick Wilson. We are Republicans. We want Trump defeated. That's who forms the core of the Lincoln Project.
Uh-huh.
And so you have people like Wilson, especially, and Schmidt, who are somewhat used to vicious media campaigns.
Oh, yes.
And they're using their talents for good instead of evil. So, that's who they are.
Yeah, don't let them choose who should be in other offices anywhere else.
Just do this.
Yes, okay. All right,
so,
I'll take
Nick Gorovich, who is a Democratic pollster, partner at Global Strategies, working on the Navigator project here. Week 10 of Navigator survey tracking poll. The great mask debate of 2020 isn't much of a debate at all. A classic case of a silent majority. 74% of the country self-identifies themselves as pro-mask, and 18% say they're anti-mask.
Okay.
So it's 100% in my garage in Connecticut,
debate.
as we pointed out. Trump is out of step on masks, as 65% disapprove of his not wearing masks, while just 27% approve. That's why his attempts to make Joe Biden into Mike Dukakis aren't going to work. Biden actually look awfully cool. It's like that GIF of Biden in the convertible whipping off his sunglasses and smiling at the camera.
He
Pretty
did have the
famous
sunglasses going on.
Yeah. So now he's got the mask and the dark glasses, and he actually looks pretty, scary. Scary.
Yeah. I mean, it's nothing like the Dukakis goofiness factor. That's true. I mean, I don't love the shot the way other people do. It's nice to see the leaders acknowledging and wearing masks. But there are pictures of Trump in a mask now, and he does look stupid. He is correct, but that was largely the case before the mask. So.
Right. It's rare, says Nick, to see a 60-plus disapprove of any Trump metric because GOP voters typically hold strong for him. Voters also strongly support requiring elected officials to wear masks.
Yeah.
Right? Do you approve or disapprove of Donald Trump's decision not to wear a mask? Disapprove 65, approve 27. And Republicans approve 54-39. But again, 54-39, he needs it to be 90 for him to be where he wants to be. And that's not happening. Do you support or oppose requiring elected officials to wear masks when in government buildings, including Congress and in state capitals around the country? Support 78, oppose 13.
Yeah, same
and
for them as for
Republicans
us.
support 69, oppose 22. They only approve of Donald Trump's decision not to wear a face mask by 54-39, but they support everybody else doing it. So they carve out an exception
Like
for Trump.
Yeah, which he's done for himself. Everyone has to wear masks around him and getting into the building.
Which at least there's hope for. Then it doesn't put them in the 18% anti-mask group.
Yes.
As a whole, they're just weird.
Stay away from them.
And that again, so long as Trump loses, it doesn't really matter.
I guess
what would
true.
matter is if
But
everybody
you have to
were
get there first.
staunchly against vaccines and masks, and regardless of Trump. That's not quite what we see here. Meanwhile, our tracking poll this week continues to show Trump's approval rating on the pandemic deeply underwater. 55% disapprove and 41% approve. And voters continue to hear far more negative things than positive things about Trump's handling of the pandemic.
Well,
that's where the free media
fairness.
comes in.
Yes.
What are people hearing? 3 clear themes. Not wearing masks, taking unproven drugs, reopening too soon.
Yes. And bleach. Is that out of the word cloud?
That's the unproven drugs there.
Yeah, okay. That's not a drug. That's not fair.
Drugs, masks, reopen, wear, taking country.
Is there room for fabric softener in this at all? I think that's been...
No.
No? Okay.
No. We've been
very
tracking
unfair.
worries around the pandemic and added a new item this week, the worry that others aren't following precautions like wearing masks. That is now in the top tier of worries along with nursing home, second wave, and recession.
Okay.
So that's what the public's thinking. Again, the beauty of polling, and don't give me this 2016 stuff, the beauty of polling is that it gives you an idea of what the public's actually thinking. So that when Trump or somebody says, yes, well, everybody's pushing to reopen. No, I'm looking at it. Well, everybody knows that they really don't want to wear a mask. Actually, they want you to wear a mask. That's what this is saying. So, you know what public opinion is thinking, so you can argue your points about what people think more than I'm telling you what I think and guising it as what people think.
Yes.
Disguising.
I got you. That was a good abbreviation. I like that, guys. Might be an archaic use of that.
The public also disapproves of the president taking hydroxychloroquine by a clear margin. The more split on whether they believe he's actually taking it. That's a good point
like
here,
that.
right? Just like you said, well, this is a law. How do we know? Did he sign it? Did we see him sign it? Did you see the bill? Do we know it made it over there? You can't assume anything about this president, as you have pointed out many times correctly.
More than you can't, yeah.
And so nobody assumes he's taken it just because he said it, and that gives
was
you an idea of
remarkable.
where the public's out on him.
That was very widely held skepticism, widely shared skepticism about that from all quarters, and I was really happy to see that happening. He now says he's stopped taking it, which I don't know. Now I don't know what that means. Does that mean he started the other day, or I don't know?
Hard to know. We asked people to use one or two words to describe their reaction to hearing Trump is taking hydroxychloroquine. I'll let you read the word clouds.
Okay, let's see.
For Democrats, lies, stupid, idiot. Lies is the biggest one.
Yes.
For
Lies,
independents,
stupid,
it's
idiot.
stupid, surprised, idiot, lies, irresponsible. And for Republicans, it's good, choice, care.
All right. Idiot.
Gives you an idea of where things are at there. Meanwhile, 55% oppose and 40% support a national reopening in the next few weeks.
Well, you're getting it.
40% support a national reopening in the next 2 weeks, 55% oppose. 40% support, that's higher support than it's been, but the change is being driven entirely by Republicans.
Which is also bad news and worries me a little bit that they can still move the debate at this point.
Yeah, they've gone from plus 13 open to plus 39 open. Independents have gone from minus 19 to minus 24. So they cannot drive it with independents. Okay. And as we've said many times, it's the Indies that are going to decide the election, not the Republicans.
Okay, that's a helpful thought.
Right? And Democrats have gone from 54 to 60. So Democrats are looking at this and saying, what are you doing? And Republicans are saying, let's party at Lake of the Ozarks.
I guess so. That must be who's doing it. There's still plenty of opportunity for that to change as people fall ill, I guess, if we get the facts about it. And I don't know that we necessarily will, but some of them will be incontrovertible. Dead people, people not showing up for work.
The news media is not very good at facts, but they're very good at taking an anecdote and making it into a fact. So they could take that Missouri situation, for example, and depending upon how it falls out, make a point out of it.
Yes, that's true. And also, if the facts, actually argue the opposite, there are certainly people prepared to ignore that. I still have people insisting to me that, see, Sweden's done it right. They're fantastic, and they didn't lock down at all, and look how great they're doing. And neither part of that assertion is actually true. But they're sticking to it.
Right. So basically, that's the story here.
Okay.
Here's another Ron Brownstein piece about changing Southwest may bring Democrats a milestone win, and talking about particularly Arizona. So all of this is simply, again, if you've listened to the show regularly, you know this. But the fact that Trump is not doing as well as he wants to be, and some of his own people are starting to panic about re-election, is not a surprise. He's never been particularly popular, and a lot of what he sells is illusion. And when you break the illusion, when you break the glamour, the spell, and you see what's going on, it just doesn't look that good for him. And Stu Rothenberg, of course, is correct. He's just about always correct about these things. That it's lean Biden, not likely Biden, yet at this particular point in time, based on what we know. And he cuts through all of the, I feel like this is going, and this is, and he's just looking at the data and saying, look, this is what the polls are telling us. And there's no question that the polls have been telling this story for at least 2 months, even before the coronavirus pandemic started. So the fact that the numbers haven't changed is actually bad for him. He needs to improve them. And he doesn't seem to show that he's capable of improving them.
Okay. Well, then, good. I'd like to just get to November already if we can, although it would be nice if there was some good weather between now and then.
So that's the story. That's the roundup for today. We'll be back tomorrow, and, we'll do it again.
Okay, we can do that, and we'll look forward to that. We haven't mentioned yet today, and not as much discussion of it in the news roundups that I've seen in the morning as I would have thought, but some serious unrest for a serious situation in Minneapolis last night, as well as, in one sense, it's that terrible thing that we can never afford to get used to, but that we're kind of getting used to in the sense of seeing it all the time. Police brutality and another black detainee killed underneath the knee of the arresting officer, and some interesting things coming out about that officer's background that won't surprise you when you hear the initial news, but a man named George Floyd.
Were they fired?
I don't know whether he's been fired yet, but he has a history, and this is not the first minority detainee he's responsible for killing during the arresting process, which is kind of eerie.
The excuse of I was afraid for my life,
yes,
and he was resisting arrest, they just don't fly anymore.
No, and all the
those
shades
are not excuses to kill somebody.
Right. It can't be. And all the shades of prior protests were there. Again, George Floyd here during the arrest complaining that he couldn't breathe because of the way he was being held down. Really incredible that you could let that happen and be seen again in public. And I guess it's not that remarkable when you turn out to be a Trump-supporting cop with other deaths on your record, as it turns out, allegedly during the initial sleuthing phase immediately following the arrest. I don't know how well all of those allegations held up, but tear gas fired in the streets yesterday. Marked distinction once again noted by everyone who watched from the liberal side, and I hope the objective truth side as well. Very different scene. The same cops who just 2 weeks ago were allowing protesters to scream in their faces and shove them backwards and storm into the Capitol building in Michigan. Yesterday, they found the riot gear that was missing during the last couple of uprisings and whiskey rebellions and whatnot. And guess what? It was in good working order when the protesters were of a different hue. So we'll definitely be discussing that going forward as well. Thanks,
well, we'll leave
Greg.
you with this new Rasmussen poll out this morning. Again, They do the daily tracker. Trump approval falls 4 net points to 42.57, his worst approval since January 2018, and worst net approval since December 2017. His strongly approve is 30, strongly disapprove is 47 in this Trump favoring poll. And those are the lowest levels since January 2018. What he's doing, Jonathan Bernstein is correct. What he's doing is not working.
Okay. Credit there to one of our favorite Jonathans, I guess. One of our Jonathan Corner, anyway. I forget who's in favor.
Take care, and I'll Jonathan Shade, Jonathan Bernstein.
Right.
We'll talk to you on
Thursday. That's tomorrow. Yes.
Tomorrow.
Remember.
Thursday.
Okay.
Can't wait.
All right. Back on with the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Welcome back. I don't know whether, I have a couple of the reports from Minneapolis in front of me here, and I'll just make sure that there's at least one in the roundup so you can read up on it. I doubt very much whether there's anybody who missed that news entirely. It's going to take some days to find out whether this is going to be a lingering sore spot and whether the protests will continue or whether this is sort of a one-time expression of the dismay and that maybe the continuance of the pandemic tamps down on interest in continuing with the protests, though it certainly won't soothe any of the raw feelings there. It may just be that the reality of the pandemic prevents people from expressing their anger and dismay as much as they'd otherwise ordinarily like to. Or hey, maybe this will continue to demonstrate a liberal will. What would it take to get liberals to come out? And I guess liberals is even the wrong label. There's certainly more liberal-leaning sentiment among the people who are out protesting, and conservatives wouldn't find themselves out protesting against something. They may show up to counter-protest in favor of it. That's still in the cards, possibly, for these guys. But it's not a liberal demonstration so much as a demonstration by members of the community that have unfortunately been the targets all too often of police brutality, and some members of supporting communities. I guess there's your liberal contingent there. People who are able to skate on privilege in most instances to get out of such situations, but who understand intrinsically that there are people who can't and who are targeted for that reason. So it's a volatile situation. It would be very interesting, though, to see if those protesters are willing to stay out in the streets, whether they think anything comes of it or not. But yeah, it was very interesting to see the police reaction. And of course, all the people who were out screaming in the face of police officers in Lansing, Michigan, and elsewhere where there were reopen the economy protests and carrying guns and screaming in the face of police officers and calling them tyrants, etc., and blaming them for the lockdown caused by actual, pathogens. We'll be right back to Blue Lives Mattering. At least online, in the next ensuing couple of days. They probably already have done it, and you've probably already run into them. All right, keeping the focus on other stories for which I'm more prepared, I guess. Not that this one from out of Minneapolis and with roots all over the country, of course, is any less important. It's just, I think, one that I can shed less light on than others can. But we'll be revisiting the story when we have more information about whether or not the protests continue or whether or not anybody learns any lessons whatsoever from the history of protest on these things. But I have my doubts about that. All right. Let's see. On the congressional front, I did put away this story from The Hill. Although, was there other reporting on it? I can't recall whether they were pointing to other sources or not, but I guess we'll find out quickly if we read The Hill's version of it. House Republicans to file lawsuit to halt proxy voting. Pretty interesting idea. And the basis of the suit, I think, is a little tenuous, but it's one of those questions that we haven't really seen addressed by courts. And after all, the point of staying in session in the Senate, even in the middle of the pandemic, to install more Republican judges on the federal bench, the whole point is to declare everyone's understanding of what the House can and can't do as pre-wrong, if necessary, and reverse our understanding of the House's ability to adopt its own rules of procedure if they hurt Republicans. Here's the deal. House Republicans are preparing to file a lawsuit against Speaker Pelosi personally in an attempt to thwart the use of proxy voting. GOP staffers familiar with the legal action confirmed on Tuesday. Yes, it was first reported in the Wall Street Journal. That will be behind a paywall, I think. So we'll stick with The Hill on this one. The rules change, which we made you aware of in the last week or so, pardon me, allows proxy voting, has been now approved along, the approval was along party lines, and passed earlier this month. It's the first such proxy vote, to get back to the track of the article here, is slated to take place on Wednesday. That'd be today. So I guess if you're going to sue, now's the time. Let's see. The Wall Street Journal first reported the lawsuit will be filed. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, a trader from California, and the guy who was the first and highest ranking Republican official in the House to sell out Ukraine. Let's see, 1, 2, 3 years before the Ukraine scandal exploded into impeachment, he was already selling out Ukraine. You know the backstory on that one. But McCarthy, and his capacity as House Minority Leader, is expected to spearhead the legal action with the support of 20 members of his conference, including, just in case you live under the thumb of one of these idiotic individuals, Representative Chip Roy of Texas, House Minority Whip Steve Scalise of Louisiana, and GOP Conference Chairwoman Liz Cheney, we all know her, along with 4 constituents from different regions for some reason. The suit is expected to be filed in the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C. That's because that's the local court of jurisdiction. Republicans, that of course on appeal means it goes to the D.C. Circuit, which is still chiefly been appointed by Democrats, although it looks like they're tipping that balance. Doesn't really matter because then, of course, they'll be appealed to the Supreme Court, where they'll do what they feel like doing. Republicans have been vocal in their disapproval of the rules change, which allows members to designate one of their colleagues to cast a vote on their behalf in the event they are unable to make it to Washington amid the pandemic. They allege it is unconstitutional, that it bucks precedent, which it does not, and that it places too much power in the hands of certain members. Our read is that this is unconstitutional, and we think that ideally Article 1 could have solved this on our own. Well, you can't, actually. But the majority passed rule that we believe is unconstitutional, and so the remedy there is for us to go to the courts and ask them to confirm our reading of the Constitution, and that will take a little bit of time, one leadership aide told reporters, adding they believe it raises significant constitutional questions if any law were to actually become effective as a result of these votes. That's the more interesting half of the question. Let's see whether they explain things at all. This is a rather short piece. I don't think so. So there'll be some room for discussion afterwards. Let's get through it, and then we'll talk about what's at stake in all of this. Democrats argue the move was necessary, of course, to keep members and staff safe during the health crisis, and that's usually a powerful argument for a lot of things that may seem unconstitutional but aren't. Noting that no member can cast votes by proxy for more than 10 members, and lawmakers' intended votes are put in writing ahead of being cast. So there's that. Earlier in the day, House Minority, why do they say House Minority Leader? He's not. He's House Majority Leader, Steny Hoyer. He's been Minority Leader in the past, but the typo here. House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer had defended the Democrats' shift to proxy voting, characterizing it as a common-sense device for keeping the House functioning and empowering all lawmakers to participate in the process, even those who have health concerns that might keep them from Washington. We believe proxy voting is not only consistent with the Constitution, but consistent with the responsibility of a member that a member has to express the views of their constituents, whether or not they can get to Washington, D.C., Hoyer said in a press call. Hoyer also dismissed the GOP attacks on proxy voting as disingenuous and ludicrous, noting that Senate Republican leaders routinely move legislation through the upper chamber by unanimous consent, which is different, allowing bills to pass with just a handful of senators in the Capitol. They call it unanimous consent, but what that means is 2 people are voting for the 100, Hoyer said. There's a seed of truth to that. I see it as a political posture without merit, and that is definitely true, that part. In addition to Pelosi, the House Clerk and Sergeant-at-Arms are expected to be named in the suit. Republicans could face difficulties in their legal efforts to stop proxy voting, as the Constitution allows for the body to set its own rules. Yeah, all right, well, they did get around to taking note of that. The competing interests here are, of course, the fairly clear delegation to each house of the power to make its own and adopt its own rules of procedure by majority vote, and that's what they did in the House, and so they have enormous leeway there. The pushback will be, for instance, I did see last week Mitch McConnell complaining for some reason about what was going on in the House. Now, he's in the Senate, so he really should basically, to borrow a phrase from him, keep his mouth shut, quite honestly, about what goes on in the House, but he didn't. And he was trying to take shots at the House by saying, well, you know, they are, for one thing, they're in recess, and that's ridiculous. We have so much work to do. And then he immediately went into recess in the Senate. So that was a little bit, that diffused that attack just a little bit. But his attack on proxy voting was that, yes, the Constitution grants each house the right to adopt its own rules of procedure, but there was also a constitutional requirement of a quorum in order to do business. And I guess some people thought that was he certainly thought that that was a better attack. It's just particularly ridiculous for senators to launch that attack because, of course, in the Senate we hear quorum calls all the time. And we see how seriously they're taken, and launching an attack over the lack of an affirmative requirement for establishing a quorum at all times is pretty ridiculous coming from the Senate. The Constitution does say that a quorum is required to conduct business, and it does say that a majority of each house shall constitute a quorum for that purpose. But there are a couple of other caveats written in there. For instance, it does say, just, as an example, that from time to time a lesser quorum can serve for certain purposes. But more to the point, really, is that while the Constitution requires a quorum to do business, the rules of each house and the precedents and procedures of each house, both House and Senate, contemplate how do you deal with conducting business when it's a given that the majority of the members are not going to be on the floor at all times. That's just not how they spend their day. And the answer is the usual rules of procedure are, sure, we require a quorum, but our rules, which the Constitution gives us the right to adopt, say that a quorum, or the presence of a quorum, will be presumed at all times unless it's brought into question affirmatively by one or by a member of each other. There are certain rules about how each house allows members to make note or suggest that there isn't a quorum. It's very easy in the Senate, and it's used all the time, and you see them say it all the time, and they use it for different reasons. They don't actually believe that there isn't a quorum present. They're just using it as a delaying tactic in most cases. But that's when you see senators say, I suggest the absence of a quorum, which in the Senate, according to its rules, automatically triggers a quorum call from the chair, basically no matter what else is going on. And it's handled as a matter of routine, and that's the thing you're most likely to see if you tune in at random to C-SPAN 2. Most of the Senate's time is spent on quorum calls. They happen several times a day. I suggest the absence of a quorum. The president, the presiding officer, will say, the clerk will call the roll. He has no choice. He has to do that. And the clerk starts reading the names of the senators alphabetically, usually without any intent of stopping and listening to hear whether or not the senators answer the quorum call, because they understand that it's being used as a delaying device and nothing else. You very rarely hear that happen in the House because the House has different rules about how the suggestion of the absence of a quorum can be made and by whom and what gets triggered when it's said. But suffice to say this, both sets of rules, House and Senate, explicitly say that the presence of a quorum is assumed unless it's demonstrated not to be there. And then here are the rules. Each house has different ones about how you demonstrate that a quorum might not be present. It's a very easy thing to do in the Senate and a very hard thing to do over the objections of the leadership in the House. You have to be recognized to speak in either the House or the Senate, but the House leadership reserves the right to insist that a member calling for a quorum call against the wishes of the leadership in the House may not be recognized for that purpose. It's a much more difficult thing to do, whereas any senator can do that at the drop of a hat in the Senate. But what was also interesting about it was, of course, if you watched the video clip circulated by McConnell's office, they were very proud of this, of him suggesting that proxy voting was unconstitutional because it assumed, or it only went on in the absence of a quorum being present in the House. He's making that complaint, one, from the Senate, where they're constantly suggesting the absence of a quorum, and two, making that complaint on an empty Senate floor. There's nobody else there, as is usually the case. And so the video, oh, well, how ridiculous is that? Democrats, they don't even have a quorum when they do their business, he says, from an empty Senate chamber. Where's the quorum in the Senate chamber? Well, you have to know that, of course, a quorum is assumed unless somebody says, hey, there's no quorum here, which is the same as it is in the House. There's been a workaround for, like, how long have we been a country? 200 and something years now, and you got to get over it. However, there is the possibility that the Supreme Court will decide we're just pre-wrong on all of this, and our working understanding of what it means to have a quorum has been incorrect the whole time because they need it to be correct now. But if they need it to be incorrect later on, they can change things as they feel like it. Anyway, I guess that's a little bit weedy, but I thought it was worth putting out there. The vehicle is there for the Supreme Court to meddle once again in what Article 1 does. Oh, yes, that was one of the aspects of the article that made me stop and think for a second, was a House Republican aide, I think, who says, our read is that it is unconstitutional and we think that ideally Article 1 could have solved this on their own. Ordinarily, the courts would have answered just that. Yeah, this is actually a question for the House. Can they adopt such a rule? Constitutionally, they can. Do we think it's smart? Political question. Sorry, can't help you with this. But this Supreme Court might opt to throw that out and to meddle if they feel like it will work out to their advantage. And don't try telling them that if Republicans ever were to take back the majority in the House, they'll want that flexibility too, so that it's in their best interest to simply allow Democrats to do it. They'll simply answer, well, if Democrats sue on the basis of this decision here, we'll just overrule that decision and say it's inapplicable when the time comes and Republicans want things to go another way. It's, that's what the Supreme Court is there for now, in their view. Okay, I think that probably takes care of that one. By the way, the other thing was that they kept arguing that there's no precedent. This is unprecedented. But of course, proxy voting was a practice in the House for many years before it was eliminated in reforms in the 70s and finally in the 80s. In its last form, it was used only in committee votes. But then again, a lot of the votes that take place on the floor are technically committee votes too. Committee of the whole House on the State of the Union. That won't answer for final passage on these things. But I think the Article 1 prerogatives of the House to make its own rules ordinarily would answer for all of that. We'll just see whether the Supreme Court is tired of 200 years of history or not. All right. Let's see. Other stories to discuss. Definitely some things that branch out into other areas. Here's an interesting story. Let's just throw this one in here. It doesn't necessarily have any applicability yet here in this country. This is happening in Switzerland, in the courts of Switzerland, according to the UK's Telegraph. Swiss company ordered to pay towards rent of employee working from home. Common problem around the world now, and with a lot of companies here in the U.S. and elsewhere likely reevaluating their commitment to large swaths of office space for people to do their work, even when the pandemic passes, should that day ever come. This is interesting and important. Will not necessarily be persuasive to American courts, but it is an argument we might want to make politically and maybe address legislatively and see what happens. The ruling comes, the subheader says, as more companies plan for remote work to become the norm after the pandemic. Let's take a look at this piece here again from the Telegraph. Companies looking to save money by having their staff work at home in future. They're English, in future, right? When you're not in hospital in future, you can work at home. Those companies have been dealt a setback by a Swiss court ruling ordering an employer to pay part of a worker's rent. It's under very specific circumstances, but the concept is certainly expandable. And we could take it out of the courtroom context and do this by legislation instead, and maybe that's the preferable method. The undisclosed business was ordered to pay 150 Swiss francs. It's only expressed here in terms of pounds, but for those of you listening in the UK, about 127 pounds. We can kind of make an approximation about how much that might be in dollars. But 150 Swiss francs for each month that a former employee used their home office to work for the company. It's not clear that this case, it's probably not related to the pandemic, but I guess it could be. Maybe they're very fast courts in Switzerland. You never know. Swiss timing and all that. Anyway, during the time that the person worked from home, they've got to pay 150 Swiss francs a month, according to this ruling, which was upheld by the country's federal court last year, that emerged in local reports over the weekend. It comes as major tech companies in the U.S. like Facebook and Twitter have committed to a significant portion of their staff working from home remotely after the coronavirus pandemic created a worldwide retreat from the office. There's more, and as it turns out, you can only read a Telegraph article once. So, I don't know, does the Pocket View give us more of it? It does, because they're not technically adept. Is that right? Or is that... or at least part of it is still visible. Anyway, the company had argued that the employer who worked from a home office, I think they mean employee here, yes, argued that the employee who worked from a home office would have paid the rent anyway and did not rent the property with the view from working from home, and no compensation for a home office had been agreed in their employment contract. However, the court ruled that they were expenses which would also benefit the employer indirectly, and compared the situation to the use of a private car for business trips. And that's an interesting analogy to make. I think there's room for addressing that issue here in the U.S. As work from home continues, it'll become a bigger issue, and as people begin to see, well, for the foreseeable future, I will be working from home. And I was willing during a month, 2 months of, sort of a panic situation and fly by the seat of our pants to say, all right, I'll work at the kitchen table, the dining room table, convert this area. This area becomes my de facto home office. But as it becomes a permanent situation, you'll find that people are interested in converting part of the house into a home office. Might some of those expenses might we expect employers to pay some of those expenses? If you're a high-ranking officer with the company, they probably will. But if you are just a run-of-the-mill employee, they'll probably resist contributing to that. Maybe until you sue them, but maybe it won't get quite that bad. I don't know. But as you need to outfit a home office, or you just say, well, I can't convert part of my home, I don't have the space for that, but still it's killing me sitting at the dining room table in these dining room chairs. Maybe I need an office chair, or other expenses arise. My computer is breaking down and I need a new one, or I need new other electronic equipment, or the lighting in here is insufficient, or I need paper, pencils, pens, whatever else might go along with it. Paper clips, not major expenses, but expenses nonetheless. Or printer ink, that can become a major expense, or printer at all, for that matter. Though that does suggest a reverse situation that we also have left unaddressed in this country where, I don't know, let's say you have a large document to print and just sitting on either a substandard printer or a printer where ink is costing you an arm and a leg at home, and people say, I'll print that out at work, let's say, or I need pens, and here are some at work, whatever it is. And people borrow from office resources and don't get charged for it all the time. So maybe there's payback here. But if companies are saving on office space, if they're just abandoning large swaths of office space and saving hundreds of thousands of dollars in rent monthly, maybe that is something that in part could be kicked back to people who suddenly have to meet all those expenses, small though they may be, from home. I don't know if you can really argue additional wear and tear on the house, per se, depreciation of the property, but maybe, especially if you're not zoned for office space, right? You don't want to, I need to be able to cover my liability if I'm sued by the jurisdiction my home is in for not having a business license, or if they require that we apply for a business license, that should certainly be covered by the business you're working for. But there are ways that this could be settled, and they could be settled legislatively. It could be settled across the board just the way hopefully we do a better job than we did with other parts of the pandemic response. But it could be an across-the-board thing. If you're on somebody's payroll, here's $1,000 tax credit for setting up a home office across the board. And even if you're not on anybody's payroll, maybe there's $1,000 in it for you too, so that you can set up a home office that you can use to look for work. It's probably easier just to administrate something like that than to be fact-checking everybody who applies for the thing and costing ourselves time and money that way. I thought it was a pretty interesting concept, and every once in a while it probably makes sense for us to suggest new legislation going forward, and legislation that puts money in people's pocket is necessary right now, very much needed. So needed in this great country of ours, as Sarah Palin might have said. All right, time for another break. We'll be back with other interesting and exciting stories, probably of more import, if we can sort them out from the chaff during this upcoming break. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Edwards Radio. Let's see. Yes, there's a suggestion here from the mighty OCD, perhaps, that we discuss the latest Trump idiotic utterings. But other than taking note of the fact that we all thought it was weird and ridiculous that I guess Trump made some offhand comments somehow I don't know what he was talking about. Maybe he was, I think it looked like he was, from the clip I saw, reading a speech, a set text about maybe doing something for the government to help with the skyrocketing cost of insulin. And by that I mean helping combat the skyrocketing cost of insulin rather than helping increase the skyrocketing cost of insulin. You never know with this guy. And I guess he pauses in the middle of his speech, and I guess the hydroxychloroquine thing is on his mind, and he says, I don't take the insulin. I don't take insulin. Maybe I should. Should I? Is that something I should be taking? I don't know whether he has any idea what insulin is for, but once again, there it is. Yeah, right. President Trump, I don't use insulin. Should I be using insulin, I guess is the idea here. I just happened to see at the same time that we talked about it, The Hill is tweeting their clip around about it. Not a hugely important story, but just, another weird utterance from Donald Trump. I guess a slightly more interesting story. I opened this up first thing in the morning when I started the show. It got posted just before we started here on the radio. Mark Sumner posting on the front page at Daily Kos, Trump threatens to shut down Twitter after the site calls him out on 2 of his 52,000 lies. I'm not certain where the figure comes from, but I guess one of the lie counters out there, professional lie counters, must have come up with that number. And I believe them at this point. But yes, yesterday, big controversy over, specifically, Trump digging up the old stories about Joe Scarborough. That's how we started the show. He was yelling at Joe Scarborough. But digging up the old story about the intern, I guess, in his office that died and was found dead in the office. And maybe some of you old folks, the old timers, remember these stories. And remember that for a while there, way back when it actually happened, there were some questions like, what the hell is going on here? How does an intern turn up dead? And was it the district office down in Florida when Joe Scarborough was a member of Congress? And many people don't even remember that. Quite honestly, it wasn't always just a TV squawker, though not from Squawk Box. He was a member of Congress, Republican member of Congress from Florida for not that long. And anyway, intern turns up dead in his office, and that always raises questions. And back in the day, it was a real sore spot for Scarborough. And I guess in one of our historical ironies, another person who has brought that issue up on the air to great controversy Marcos, our own Marcos Moulitsas of Daily Kos fame, of course. You may have heard of him around here on Daily Kos Radio. Famously brought that up and was on the air, perhaps, or I don't know whether he was accusing. It wasn't. I guess he was just sort of talking about the weird mystery of it all. It had not yet been. I don't think it had yet been solved. And it turns out, perhaps in hindsight now, a settled story having been agreed upon for this person's death. I think it's probably pretty widely agreed upon that the accusation was unfair and maybe even had been unfair at the time. But Joe Scarborough was, an antagonist, and I don't think things had been settled quite then, and so there was still this cloud of suspicion when Marcos raised it. But I guess now we're saying that the story is more or less settled, so that in hindsight that was a moment that reflected poorly on him. But quite honestly, I don't really care what happens to Joe Scarborough. In fact, I guess for consistency's sake, I don't even really care very much that Donald Trump is attacking Joe Scarborough over this, although he has given it a different twist. In the ensuing years, as it turns out, the story having more or less been settled now, as it turns out, I guess I was picturing a younger person when we spoke about an intern in his office, but apparently she was, I think, something in the neighborhood of 28 years old, and a married woman, apparently, at the time, and her husband, now widower, has pressed Trump to please refrain from using the story because it causes personal pain for him and the family, and you can understand exactly why, a little bit along the lines of the Seth Rich story, which Trump also insists on perpetuating. But that's what led to the current controversy, that the widower is asking that Trump not use the story, but also pressing Twitter to accept the current understanding of the story such that it could label Trump's version of it a falsehood, and therefore he calls on them to delete it from Twitter. Twitter has already announced that they refuse to do so, but they are forced by circumstances to revisit their policies on what to do with consistent sources of consistent misinformation, which ordinarily, they used to have rules about this thing when back from before the days when they thought that it would be applied accurately to the president of the United States or the alleged president of the United States. Now that that's become clear that they have to do that, they find themselves in a real jam. Can you censor or restrict comments from one of their most popular users, and so the guy who populates a vast, significant portion of their content, such as it is, and two, as president of the United States, does he have different rules apply, et cetera, et cetera? But it seems like they settled on not even splitting the baby, really, but just cutting a foot, perhaps, off of the baby. If you got to do something, mutilate the baby and get it right. Apparently, that's how we solve problems. Historically, I don't really understand that, but that's what we do. And they ended up labeling his tweets misleading, and they have some sort of a warning label that at least some of his tweets are misleading in some form. It's a very weak sauce. But anyway, that apparently that angered Trump. And I think his strategists think that there's political advantage in saying, see, the liberal media is trying to censor me, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know exactly whether or not that's going to work. It doesn't make a great deal of sense. They're kind of going all in on it. But the idea that a billionaire press maven who is also happens to be president of the United States, or claims to be anyway, and is also raking in millions and even billions of dollars of additional donations from the rubes around the country. So somebody who has billions and billions of dollars for the media and for messaging at his disposal. How could such a wealthy person with the world's most powerful platform for reaching the press ever get their message out? He's really the victim in all this, don't you see? Well, anyway, Trump now threatening to, he says, Mark Sumner says, shut down Twitter after he's been called out on 2 of his many, many lies. On Tuesday, Donald Trump did something that Donald Trump does every day. Lie on Twitter, Mark says. But something unusual did happen in response. After 52,000 tweets, that's where the number is coming from, Twitter decided to actually call out one of Trump's persistent lies. Specifically, Twitter added "Get the facts" tags. It wasn't even about the story of Scarborough's intern, although that is where the latest call to crack down on Trump's tweeting comes from. There have been many. But they were tagging with the "Get the facts" tag Trump's tweets about not even coronavirus, which is something that I thought would come first, but rather vote by mail. I think the "Get the facts" thing I first encountered, I'm sure they've used it before, but I first encountered it anytime you're looking at things that are misleading about COVID, coronavirus, or the response to it, or whether or not you ought to take certain medications in response to it, etc. "Get the facts" came up. But now you got to get the facts about mail, voting by mail, and fraud claims. Those facts show that Trump's claims about vote by mail leading to fraud are themselves fraudulent. Clicking the Twitter-added link takes readers to a fact-checking page detailing ways in which Trump's statements about voting by mail are absolutely wrong, false, lies. And as might be imagined, Trump has responded Wednesday morning with a sputtering fury in which he's accused Twitter and all of social media, in fact, with, quote, silencing conservative voices. That's what's happened. And with interfering in the 2020 election. And with, it says stiffing free speech. I assume he means stifling free speech, but I guess you could make the argument that that word works. With quite few more capital letters involved, Mark notes here. But Trump is not only blasting Twitter, all social media, and the fact checkers, he's threatening to either regulate Twitter or shut them down completely. And just as he was going to order all the governors to open all the churches, he may find that he actually lacks the authority to do any of these things. The tags that Twitter added to the pair of tweets are the first sign that Twitter is trying to hold Trump to anything approximating the rules that face ordinary users of the service. Trump's eruptive response doesn't just include a threat to, quote, strongly regulate social media sites or close them down, but claims that Twitter's actions are stifling, there we go, now using the correct word, stifling free speech, and that Trump, quote, will not allow it. We'll see. Twitter is, of course, a private company. It's not subject to claims of First Amendment violations because it's not a government actor. The government can't either limit speech on a private platform or require that the platform carry particular speech. Twitter is not a regulated public forum because numerous court rulings dating back decades have made a firm definition of those forums that make them closely aligned to town halls. On the other hand, as a public official, Trump does have regulated responsibilities concerning speech. He has already lost one fight over Twitter when multiple court rulings made it illegal for him to block Twitter users who posted replies to his tweets that Trump didn't like. Both a district court and an appeals court ruled that Trump could no longer, thanks to a lawsuit brought by former Daily Kos Judicial Affairs editor Rebecca Pilar Buckwalter Poza. How about that? There's no doubt that Trump can issue regulations to demand that Twitter never add a comment to his post, or block any conservative throwing around lies and hate speech. Among others, FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai would likely hop at the chance to craft such a regulation, but it's almost equally certain that the regulation could never be enacted. Trump wouldn't be writing a regulation, he'd just be drafting a headline for his latest fundraising appeal. And at the bottom of this particular tirade is the power that fuels so many of Trump's biggest lies, projection. In his Tuesday evening fuming over Twitter tags, Trump claims that social media platforms attempted to intervene against him in the 2016 campaign. In fact, it was thousands of Russian bots, hundreds of genuinely fake media sites, detailed analysis courtesy of Cambridge Analytica, direct cooperation from Facebook's targeted ad services that turned social media into Trump's biggest tool in 2016. Since then, Republicans haven't backed away. They're still at it. Dozens of fake local news, and that's in scare quotes, local news sites have popped up across critical swing states, and the whole reopen protest movement is a carbon copy of the Russian playbook from 2016. Trump can't count on uncritical New York Times headlines to carry all his lies to the public. He needs Twitter. That platform and the rest of social media are the heart of the right-wing propaganda engine that fuels anger, divisiveness, and racial hate. If the social media sites didn't exist, Trump's team would have built them, and they absolutely will, as soon as they've gotten all they can from the existing platforms. This morning also, in the 10 o'clock hour, there was a similar threat, I guess a renewal of the threat from Trump, tweeting just before our last break at 10:22. Twitter has now shown that everything we have been saying about them and their compatriots is correct. Big action to follow. So I guess that means no action to follow. That's probably how we can understand that particular note. All right, a couple of other stories to drop on you as well. Let's see. Which were the ones that we wanted to... Oh, this is an interesting one. Since we were talking legislation at some point, we might want to add this to our arsenal here. Washington Post story from Todd Frankel. Todd C. Frankel is how he writes the byline. This is kind of interesting. Just in terms of reopening and whether it's worth it, and how do you actually determine whether it's worth it? Are we forever mired in, well, I think the economy is more important. Well, I think lives are more important. Well, you got chocolate on my peanut butter, both sides, and there's no way for us to tell whether this is a dessert topping or a floor wax, but there actually is. And it probably shouldn't surprise anybody that there is. You've seen it used all the time, and that's the point of this article. The government, the headline says, has spent decades studying what a life is worth. It hasn't made a difference in the COVID-19 crisis. That's the headline. But the point is that it could and should. The U.S. government often studies the trade-off between cost and safety. But the White House has failed to release any analysis of the pandemic, which could offer clues to what's ahead. As a matter of fact, the insistence on conducting cost-benefit analyses for all government regulations has been a Republican hobby horse for some time now. The fact that most of these things are conducted at all is thanks to Republican insistence that they be conducted, and now they are disregarding the results because they're not useful to them politically for the first time. Let's hit the article here. When President Trump said in late March he didn't think the economic devastation from stay-at-home orders was a good trade-off for avoiding COVID-19 deaths, tweeting, in all caps, of course, "We cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself," economists across the country already were busy working on that exact kind of cost-benefit analysis implied by the president. And guess what? They reached a very different conclusion from Trump. Economists at the University of Wyoming, for instance, I'm sure a liberal bastion, right, estimated the economic benefits from lives saved by efforts to flatten the curve outweighed the projected massive hit to the nation's economy by a staggering $5.2 trillion. Another study by two University of Chicago economists, and the University of Chicago economists also notorious liberals, right, estimated the savings from social distancing could be so huge that, quote, "it is difficult to think of any intervention with such large potential benefits to American citizens," unquote. In other words, the economists were saying the cure doesn't come at a cost at all when factoring in the economic value of the lives saved. It's just that Republicans don't believe in valuing life, even though that's supposed to be the heart of their political platform or something like that. But in fact, they are, of course, the party of death, and everything's upside down. But that's what they've sold you, so that's what we believe about it. All right. What these academics are doing, and what Trump's tweet is getting at, is measuring how the extreme efforts to avoid COVID-19 deaths compare to the devastating economic fallout. They do this by putting a price tag on the deaths avoided. It's something the federal government does all the time when deciding whether to require car makers to install new safety features, or require drug makers to add new warning labels. And it's required by law for big-ticket new regulations, such as road safety laws and pollution controls. Oh, you're going to make us put scrubbers on our smokestacks to reduce carbon emissions? Well, do a cost-benefit analysis. The idea of Republicans was, it'll be impossible to do such an analysis, at least not without our criticism and attempting to throw it out as worthless. But more to the point, it will bog you down for years and you won't be able to impose this regulation before industry can sue and win to stop the regulation. They didn't really mean for the analysis to be done, but apparently people are doing it because it's required. I know, and it sounds like cold and calculating stuff, like the stuff that leads to, human capital stock declarations or whatever. But, if you're going to require it by law, somebody's got to put a price tag on a life. And it's cold and calculating, but it gets done. But this kind of approach has been missing from the debate about how to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has killed almost 100,000 Americans and fueled historic unemployment rates. By the way, this has not stopped Republicans from saying that those people who approve of the lockdown and might even advise that the lockdown continue either in its current or some modified form are in fact killing more Americans than the virus, and that we are objectively pro-mass murder now. That's where we are. We're no longer objectively pro-Saddam. I ran into this one last night. You're pro-mass murder because you want to keep people in their homes and they will die of poverty and starvation, which really makes me sad. Crocodile tears from the Republicans, who are, of course, cutting food stamps in the middle of all this, but are suddenly alerted to the idea. Anyway, I think it is very Russian in its feel, even if not in its origin. I mean, it's an organic kind of political attack. Find something that the opposition claims to value and then accuse them of hypocrisy in their current position because you make the claim that that what they want damages that thing that they claim to care about in other circumstances, and therefore they're hypocrites. You say you don't want people to starve to death in poverty, but if you force 30 million people into unemployment, then they will, in fact, starve. Well, they'll starve if we don't help them. Why don't we help them? Well, because if we help them, then they won't starve, and we can't accuse you of starving them. That's the obvious answer, you see. But there we go. The calculation, back to the article, known as the value of a statistical life. That does sound gross, right? But it does have an abbreviation, so it can sound cool. VSL. Value of a statistical life, or VSL, is the amount people are willing to spend to cut risk enough to save one life. It's a nice, neat metric. The VSL, at most federal agencies, developed over several decades, is about $10 million. Which, I guess to a billionaire is like, great, I'll buy several lives and waste them all. Or maybe I can put them in a bag and keep them for later when I die. It doesn't really work that way, but it will not appall a billionaire to, I guess, kill off a few people $10 million at a time. But for the rest of us, all right, I mean, I guess if you got to settle on a figure, if I were wrongfully killed by some corporation or another and my family sued for my wrongful death, a $10 million award might make a certain amount of sense for an average American, let's say a hypothetical average American, somewhere between billionaire and impoverished person. The $10 million seems like whatever. That's what we'll settle on. Okay, let's go forward from there. The debate over letting the economy reopen or protecting more lives has become one of the many political fights dividing the nation, but a cost-benefit analysis using VSL, while far from perfect, would force policymakers to confront the reality of their decisions in a much more precise way. Without it, they're left to gut feelings, educated guesses, or political arguments, all of which can be extraordinarily disingenuous, as you may have seen. Two key federal agencies that previously have used this type of research to support policy decisions under Trump, including the CDC and the White House Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, which oversees federal regulations, both say they are not using this type of cost-benefit analysis in their response to the pandemic. It's missing from the discussion, said Linda Thunstrom, an economist at the University of Wyoming. So instead, you have such loud voices on both sides advocating that all lives should be saved, or no, I've never heard anyone say that because it's impossible, or that no, we need to open the economy. But there are trade-offs. It's hard, but we should be talking about them. But instead, we'll protest and shove guns in your face, I guess. This type of research can help guide decisions about reopening businesses, resuming schools, identifying which social distancing measures are worthwhile, and how to value a pandemic that seems to target older adults, economists say. It acts as a counterbalance to the easier-to-measure economic costs of fighting the virus, such as the Atlanta Federal Reserve's projection that the nation's gross domestic product could crater by nearly 43% during the current second quarter. Economists have tried to answer the question, what's a life worth, by trying to calculate the value of a statistical life, literally the price of what people are willing to spend to lower odds of death. The dilemma here is, how do you value reducing the risk? Said Alan Krupnik, an economist at the think tank Resources for the Future, and a former member of President Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors who studies the topic. The economist's answer is to ask people and observe their behavior. Economists use public opinion surveys on mortality risk. They look at how much more dangerous jobs pay. They study what people are willing to spend for safety devices, such as bike helmets. The information is then used to calculate VSL. The FAA used VSL to help judge whether to require pilots to train and test with flight simulators. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration used it to calculate the savings from tougher standards for crush-resistant automobile roofs. The Food and Drug Administration used it to determine the savings from fewer adverse events resulting from new labeling on asthma inhalers. In each case, the costs of complying with the new rules, installing flight simulators or strengthening SUV roofs, were concrete. The value of fewer deaths was not. The COVID-19 pandemic offers a good opportunity for cost-benefit analysis, economists say, helping policymakers think through their reactions to what are eye-popping numbers on both sides, the economy and the death toll. Both sides. There's no getting around that COVID is a terrible thing that happened, said Michael Greenstone, a University of Chicago economist who co-authored a study on VSL and the pandemic's impact. Now we're just trying to figure out how to balance two difficult things, lives lost and incomes lost. But the CDC is not doing any of the cost-benefit analysis of the pandemic's social distancing measures, agency spokesman Tom Skinner said. The CDC is no stranger to this kind of research. CDC scientists in 2019 published a study looking at how the payoff from the fight against hospital-acquired infections is even bigger when taking into account the value of the lives saved. The OMB said it wasn't doing a pandemic cost-benefit analysis either, according to an agency official requesting anonymity. The White House Council of Economic Advisors, through spokeswoman Rachel Slobodin, declined to comment on whether it has looked at the issue. Trump's Council of Economic Advisors has used VSL before to make the case in 2017 that the costs associated with the nation's opioid crisis were vastly underestimated because they failed to account for the economic losses from overdose deaths. Back when that was a thing for them, I guess they cared about it. In early May, the council hinted it was looking into the pandemic when it tweeted a chart that projected Americans would stop dying from COVID-19 by the middle of this month. But the chart tracked only the number of deaths, like a medical disease model would, staying silent on the economic costs of those deaths. The chart was widely criticized for its mortality projections, which was wrong. More than 1,000 people a day are still dying from COVID-19. The Wyoming economists sent a copy of their cost-benefit study to the White House Advisory Council, but they haven't heard back, interestingly enough. Their study looked at models projecting both the pandemic's death toll, the effects of social distancing efforts, and the economic impact. The study estimated the U.S. economy would shrink less from an uncontrolled pandemic, the GDP declining by $6.49 trillion, less than a pandemic curtailed by social distancing, where GDP would decline by $13.7 trillion. But Social distancing would slash the peak infection rate in half, resulting in 1.2 million fewer deaths, leading to a VSL of $12 trillion. So the value of social distancing would work out to a net benefit of $5.16 trillion, the study estimated. Hey, it's just math, but apparently it's beyond the administration's interest. Anyway, so far the number of deaths has been lower than the study projected, so social distancing has done more than what we assumed. The benefits appear greater than expected, but the drop in GDP also appears worse than they projected. There's still so much uncertainty, so we still have yet to see where we land, but there's modeling information out there, and with the margin between the costs and the benefits still being net $5 trillion on the side of social distancing, it's hard to imagine erasing that advantage. All right, time for us to wrap things up and hand it over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. No doubt a vast collection of stories we haven't been able to touch on here, as always, and we got more, believe me, for the rest of the week.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
With David Waldman.
How about the international news here from Justice? The spread of coronavirus has caused a spike in corruption across Latin America, and Asia stocks are mixed on uncertainty over the mainland China-imposed Hong Kong security law. All that plus more, even domestic news with Justice next.